The dust rose in golden plumes beneath Thunder's hooves, as Ryder Sullivan pushed his stallion harder across the Nevada basin, his heart hammering against his ribs like a war drum, because the woman he loved was dying, and he had exactly 3 hours to reach Elko before the sun set on her last day. The telegram had reached him at dawn while he was rounding up strays in the eastern pastures of the Double S Ranch, the words burning themselves into his mind with the permanence of a brand. Margaret Collins gravely ill. Fever won't break. Doc says maybe 2 days. Come quick. It was signed by Sarah Morrison, the schoolteacher who boarded in the same house as Margaret. Ryder had been in the saddle within 10 minutes, pushing Thunder through terrain that would have broken lesser horses, his mind refusing to accept what his gut already knew to be true. Margaret Collins had arrived in Elko 6 months ago, stepping off the afternoon stage with nothing but a worn carpetbag and a letter of introduction to the local schoolmaster. She was 22 years old, with hair the color of autumn wheat and eyes that held both sadness and determination in equal measure. Ryder had been loading supplies at the general store when he first saw her, standing in the middle of Railroad Street looking lost and beautiful and completely out of place in the rough mining town that was still finding its footing in the summer of 1879. He had tipped his hat to her, meaning to walk on by because he had never been good with words around women, especially pretty ones. But she had smiled at him, a real smile that reached those gray-green eyes, and asked if he could point her toward the boarding house on Silver Street. Ryder had ended up carrying her bag the whole way, learning in those 10 minutes that she was from Philadelphia, that she had come west to start over after her father's death, and that she had the kind of laugh that made a man want to be funnier than he actually was. Over the following months, Ryder had found excuses to be in town more often than ranch business strictly required. He would time his supply runs to coincide with Margaret's walks to the schoolhouse where she worked as an assistant teacher. He would linger at the church social just to hear her voice as she organized the children for games. He would sit through town council meetings he had no interest in, because she sometimes attended to take notes for the weekly newspaper. It had taken him 4 months to work up the courage to ask if he could walk her home from the Independence Day celebration. She had said yes without hesitation, and they had strolled through the cooling evening air talking about everything and nothing. She told him about her mother who had died when she was young, about her father who had been a bookkeeper and had taught her to read before she was 4, about the grief that had driven her west when his heart finally gave out. Ryder had shared stories about growing up on the ranch his father had built from nothing, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the quiet satisfaction of working land that would someday be his. That night had been the first of many. Through the late summer and into fall, they had become inseparable when Ryder was in town. He had taught her to ride on one of the ranch's gentler mares. She had taught him to appreciate poetry, reading Wordsworth aloud while they sat by the Humboldt River on Sunday afternoons. By October, everyone in Elko assumed they would marry come spring, and Ryder had been planning to make it official at Christmas, had already sent away to San Francisco for a ring that would arrive on the December stage. But winter had come early and harsh to northern Nevada. Margaret had spent a cold November day helping search for a child who had wandered from her homestead, trudging through knee-deep snow for hours before the girl was found safe. 2 days later, Margaret had developed a cough. A week after that, the fever started. Doc Harrington had done what he could with whiskey compresses and willow bark tea, but the fever had only climbed higher, and Margaret had grown weaker with each passing day. The telegram had found Ryder at the winter pasture camp, 25 miles from Elko, where he had been working to bring the cattle down from the high country before the next storm hit. He had left the other hands to finish the job, knowing his father would understand, knowing nothing mattered except getting to Margaret. Thunder crested a ridge and Elko spread out below them, a collection of wooden buildings huddled along the railroad tracks that had brought life to this stretch of desert. Ryder could see the church steeple, the false-fronted stores along Railroad Street, the scatter of homes spreading outward like seeds thrown on hard ground. He urged Thunder down the slope, the stallion's powerful legs eating up the distance, his coat dark with sweat despite the December cold. The boarding house on Silver Street was a neat two-story structure painted white with green shutters, standing out among the rougher buildings around it. Ryder tied Thunder to the rail and took the porch steps 2 at a time. Sarah Morrison opened the door before he could knock, her face grave. "She's been asking for you," Sarah said quietly. "Doc's with her now. He says the fever's too high, that her lungs are filling up. He doesn't think she'll make it through the night." Ryder felt something crack inside his chest. There must be something that can be done. Some medicine, some treatment. "Doc's tried everything he knows," Sarah said, stepping back to let him in. "I'm so sorry, Ryder." He climbed the stairs to the second floor, each step feeling like walking through water. Doc Harrington emerged from Margaret's room just as Ryder reached the landing. The old physician looked tired, his white beard stained yellow from years of pipe smoke, his eyes sad behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "She's awake," Doc said. "But Ryder, you need to prepare yourself. I've seen this kind of fever before. It's pneumonia deep in both lungs. Without the right medicine, without something to break the fever and fight the infection, she won't see morning." "What medicine?" Ryder demanded. "I'll get whatever she needs. I'll pay anything." Doc Harrington shook his head slowly. "There's a new drug, something called sulfanilamide that doctors back east are using for bacterial infections. I read about it in a medical journal. It's supposed to be remarkably effective against pneumonia. But Ryder, there's none to be had anywhere in Nevada. The nearest supply would be in Sacramento, maybe San Francisco. Even if you left right now, even if you could find it, you'd never make it back in time." "There has to be someone closer," Ryder said, his mind racing. "Someone who might have it, some doctor, some—" "Wait," Doc said, his eyes narrowing in thought. "There might be one possibility. Marcus Chen, the Chinese herbalist who lives up in the canyon beyond the old Hopkins claim. He's not a real doctor, mind you, but he's got connections to San Francisco, has things shipped in regular for the railroad workers. I've heard rumors he sometimes has medicines that I don't, things from China that work in ways I don't understand. It's a long shot, Ryder, a very long shot." "Where exactly is his place?" Ryder asked. Doc gave him directions to a cabin tucked into the foothills about 8 miles north of town. "But Ryder, even if he has something that could help, Marcus Chen is known for driving hard bargains. He doesn't take credit and he doesn't work cheap." "I've got money saved," Ryder said. "I hope it's enough," Doc replied, then stepped aside. "Go see her first. She's been waiting for you." Ryder pushed open the door to Margaret's room. The space was small and simple, with a washstand, a wardrobe, and a narrow bed where Margaret lay beneath several quilts. The room was hot, a fire blazing in the small stove, but Margaret was shivering. Her face was flushed with fever, her hair damp with sweat, but her eyes opened when she heard him enter. "Ryder," she whispered, and even that single word seemed to cost her. He crossed to her side and knelt by the bed, taking her hand in his. Her skin was burning hot. "I'm here, Margaret. I'm here, and I'm going to get you the medicine you need. Doc told me about an herbalist who might have something that can help." "Don't," she said, her voice barely audible. "Don't waste your money on false hope. Doc says I'm dying. I can feel it, Ryder. My chest feels like it's full of stones. You're not dying, Ryder said fiercely. I won't let you. We have plans, remember. I'm supposed to take you to see the ranch in spring when the wildflowers cover the valley. We're supposed to build a life together. A tear slid down her flushed cheek. I wanted that so much. I want you to know that these past months have been the happiest of my life. After my father died, I thought I would never feel whole again, but you made me feel alive, Ryder. You made me want to hope again. Then keep hoping, he said, bringing her hand to his lips. Keep fighting. I'm going to ride out right now and get what you need. When I come back, you're going to take that medicine and get better, and come spring I'm going to ask you properly to marry me with the ring I ordered and everything done right. She managed a weak smile. You already ordered a ring. 2 months ago. It's supposed to arrive any day now. That's very presumptuous of you, Ryder Sullivan, she said, but there was warmth in her voice. Is it presumptuous if I'm right? He asked. I suppose we'll find out, she whispered. Then her expression turned serious. But Ryder, if this doesn't work, if I don't make it through tonight, I need you to know that I love you. I've loved you since that first day when you carried my bag and told me terrible jokes to make me laugh. Those jokes were excellent, he said, forcing lightness into his voice even as his heart was breaking. And you're going to have to hear a lot more of them, so you'd better pull through this. He kissed her forehead, feeling the unnatural heat of her skin, then forced himself to stand. I'll be back before you know it. Outside, he untied Thunder and swung into the saddle, the great horse snorting and stamping, ready to run again despite the hard ride from the winter camp. Ryder turned north, following the directions Doc had given him, pushing through the gathering dusk into the foothills beyond town. The canyon where Marcus Chen lived was a narrow cleft in the hills, lined with juniper and sage. Ryder followed a rough track that wound deeper into the rocks, the temperature dropping as the sun disappeared behind the western peaks. He almost missed the cabin, tucked as it was into a fold of the hillside, invisible until you were right on top of it. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and warm light glowed from the windows. Ryder dismounted and approached the door, knocking firmly. The man who answered was perhaps 50 years old, with gray threading through his black hair and intelligent eyes that assessed Ryder in a single glance. Marcus Chen. Ryder asked. I am. You are the Sullivan boy from the Double S Ranch. I've seen you in town. I need medicine, Ryder said without preamble. A woman is dying in Elko. Doc Harrington says she has pneumonia, that she needs something called sulfanilamide or something like it. He said you might have things that other doctors don't. Marcus Chen was silent for a moment, then stepped back from the door. Come in. Let me examine what I have. The cabin's interior was warm and crowded with shelves holding countless jars and bottles. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling, and the air was thick with unfamiliar scents. Marcus moved to a cabinet and began pulling out various containers, examining labels written in Chinese characters. Pneumonia is serious, he said as he worked. Your doctor is right that sulfanilamide would be best, but I do not have it. However, I have something that may work. A combination of herbs from China, and a tincture made from a fungus that grows on certain grains. My people have used it for lung infections for many generations. I also have some quinine pills that came from the railroad company's medical supplies. Together, these might break the fever and allow her body to fight the infection. I'll take them, Ryder said immediately. How much? Marcus turned to face him, holding a small bundle of packets and bottles. The price is not in money, Mr. Sullivan. Ryder felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean? I know your horse. Thunder, you call him. The black stallion with the white star. He is famous in this county. There is not a finer horse in all of Nevada, perhaps in all the West. Men have offered you small fortunes for him, and you have always refused to sell. Thunder's not for sale, Ryder said automatically. Then the woman will die, Marcus said simply. Because this medicine, which may save her life, is very rare and very valuable. I had to pay dearly to obtain it, and I can only replace it with great difficulty and expense. The only payment I will accept for it is your horse. Ryder felt like he had been punched in the gut. Thunder was more than just a horse. He was Ryder's partner, his friend, the animal he had raised from a foal after Thunder's mother died giving birth. Ryder had spent countless hours training him, had trusted him with his life in dangerous situations, had shared with him a bond that went beyond words. Thunder was fast and strong and intelligent, the kind of horse a cowboy might get once in a lifetime if he was lucky, but Margaret was dying. If I give you Thunder, Ryder said slowly, what guarantee do I have that the medicine will work? None, Marcus said honestly. Medicine is not magic. It may work or it may fail. But without it, your woman has no chance at all. With it, she has perhaps a 50% chance of survival, maybe better if she is strong and the sickness has not progressed too far. Ryder closed his eyes, seeing Margaret's flushed face, hearing her labored breathing, remembering the fear in her eyes when she told him she was dying. Then he thought of Thunder, of the years they had spent together, of the trust and loyalty between them. It wasn't really a choice at all. You have a deal, Ryder said, opening his eyes. But I need to get this medicine to her right now. I'll bring Thunder back tomorrow. Marcus shook his head. The horse now or no deal. I am sorry, but I have learned to be careful in business. Ryder's hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to nod. Let me say goodbye to him. Outside, Thunder waited patiently, his ears pricking forward when Ryder approached. Ryder ran his hand down the stallion's neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath the sleek coat. I'm sorry, boy, he whispered. I'm so sorry, but I love her more than anything, and I need you to understand that. Thunder nickered softly, nuzzling Ryder's shoulder as he had done 1,000 times before. Ryder felt tears sting his eyes, but he blinked them back. He removed his saddle and bridle, his good rope and saddlebags, everything that was his. Then he handed the reins to Marcus Chen. He likes apples, Ryder said, his voice rough, and he's nervous in thunderstorms. He's never been sick a day in his life, and he'll run himself to death if you push him too hard, so you have to be careful. He's loyal and smart and the best horse I've ever known. I will treat him with honor, Marcus said, and there was respect in his voice. I know what it costs you to give him up. Marcus handed over the bundle of medicines along with a sheet of paper with detailed instructions written in careful English. The tincture 3 times a day, the herbs brewed as tea every 4 hours, the pills twice a day. If the fever doesn't break within 24 hours, give her a double dose of the tincture, and make sure she drinks water constantly. Dehydration kills as surely as the fever. Ryder tucked the medicines carefully into his saddlebag, then hefted the saddle onto his shoulder. Thank you, he said, though the words felt like ashes in his mouth. The walk back to Elko seemed endless. The saddle grew heavier with each mile, and the night grew colder. Ryder's boots raised small clouds of dust on the dark road, and his breath plumed white in the freezing air. He thought about Thunder, hoping Marcus Chen was a man of his word, hoping the stallion would be treated well. But mostly he thought about Margaret, praying he wasn't too late, praying the medicine would work. It was past midnight when he finally stumbled onto Silver Street. The boarding house was still lit up, and Sarah Morrison must have been watching for him because she opened the door before he reached it. She's worse, Sarah said. The fever's even higher than before. Doc's been here the whole time, but there's nothing more he can do. Ryder took the stairs 3 at a time. In Margaret's room, Doc Harrington was applying cool cloths to her forehead, his expression grim. Margaret was barely conscious, her breathing shallow and rapid, her lips tinged with blue. "I've got medicine," Ryder said, pulling out the packets. An herbalist in the canyon, he had things for pneumonia. Doc Harrington took the papers and read through them quickly, his eyebrows rising. "Marcus Chen? I've heard of him. Some of the railroad workers swear by his remedies." He examined the bottles and packets. "I don't know what half of these ingredients are, but I've heard stories about Chinese medicine working when everything else failed. At this point, we have nothing to lose." Together, they prepared the first doses according to Marcus's instructions. Doc brewed the herbs into a strong tea while Ryder measured out the tincture. Sarah held Margaret upright while they coaxed the medicines down her throat. Margaret barely seemed aware of what was happening, her eyes unfocused, her skin burning. "Now we wait," Doc said. "If the fever's going to break, it should happen within 12 hours. If it doesn't, or if it gets worse, then I'm afraid these medicines won't be enough." Ryder pulled a chair beside Margaret's bed and took her hand. "I'm not leaving her," Doc nodded. "I'll be back at first light. Sarah will help you with the doses during the night. God willing, she'll still be with us come morning." The hours that followed were the longest of Ryder's life. He and Sarah worked together to get medicine into Margaret every few hours, to keep her covered when she shivered with chills, to wipe her face and neck with cool water when the fever raged. Ryder talked to her constantly, telling her about the ranch, about the plans he had for their future, about anything and everything that came to mind. He didn't know if she could hear him, but he needed her to know he was there, that he wasn't giving up. Around 4 in the morning, Margaret began to cough, deep rattling coughs that shook her whole body. Sarah looked frightened, but Ryder remembered Marcus's instructions mentioning that coughing might be a good sign, might mean the medicines were helping her lungs clear. He held Margaret while she coughed, supporting her, murmuring encouragement. Dawn came cold and gray, light seeping through the window to paint the room in shades of silver. Ryder was exhausted, his eyes burning with fatigue, but he didn't dare sleep. He kept his vigil, kept talking, kept praying. Around 7 in the morning, he realized Margaret's hand felt cooler in his. He touched her forehead and felt his heart leap. The fever was down, not gone but definitely lower than it had been. Her breathing seemed a little easier too, less of that terrible rasping quality. "Sarah," he said urgently, "I think the fever's breaking." Sarah hurried over and felt Margaret's forehead herself. A smile broke across her tired face. "You're right. Oh, thank God you're right." Doc Harrington arrived an hour later and confirmed what they already knew. "The fever's dropping steadily," he said, checking Margaret's pulse. "Her lungs still sound bad, but better than last night. That herbalist's medicine is doing what mine couldn't. She's not out of danger yet, but I think she's going to make it." Ryder felt tears of relief slide down his cheeks, and he didn't care who saw them. He brought Margaret's hand to his lips and just held it there, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Margaret slept through most of that day, a real sleep, rather than the fevered unconsciousness of before. By evening she was able to drink some broth, and her eyes were clearer when she looked at Ryder. "You came back," she whispered. "I told you I would," he said. "I dreamed about horses running," she said. "Black horses with white stars. It was such a vivid dream." Ryder felt something twist inside him, but he just smiled. "Rest now. Get your strength back." Over the next few days, Margaret improved steadily. The fever disappeared completely. The cough persisted but grew less severe. Her appetite returned and color came back to her cheeks. By the end of the week, she was able to sit up in bed, and by the second week, she was taking short walks around her room. Ryder was there every day, making the 8-mile walk from the ranch because he had no horse to ride. He never told Margaret what had happened to Thunder, deflecting her questions with vague answers about the stallion being on loan to help with ranch work in a distant pasture. He didn't want her to know what the medicine had cost, didn't want her to feel the guilt he knew would weigh on her. But secrets have a way of coming out in small towns. It was 3 weeks after Margaret's fever broke, just 2 days before Christmas. She was well enough now to leave her room, to sit in the boarding house parlor and receive visitors. Ryder had arrived that afternoon with a small bag of oranges he had bought at the general store, a rare treat shipped in from California. They were sitting together on the settee, Margaret eating an orange and laughing at one of Ryder's stories, when Ben Morrison came in. Ben was Sarah's husband, the blacksmith who shod most of the horses in the county. He looked uncomfortable when he saw Ryder. "Sullivan," Ben said with a nod. "Miss Collins, glad to see you looking so well." "Thank you, Mr. Morrison," Margaret said. "I understand I have many people to thank for my recovery, including your kind wife." "She was happy to help," Ben said. Then, after an awkward pause, "Sullivan, I saw your horse in town today. At least I thought it was Thunder until I saw Marcus Chen riding him." Ryder felt his blood turn to ice. "It's a different horse," he said quickly. "Just happens to look similar." "No, it was Thunder all right," Ben insisted. "I'd know that stallion anywhere. I've shot him enough times. I tried to ask Chen about it, but he wouldn't say much except that the horse was his now, bought and paid for. I thought maybe you'd sold him, but I couldn't imagine you ever selling Thunder, not for any price." Margaret had gone very still beside Ryder. When he glanced at her, he saw understanding dawning in her eyes, saw the color draining from her face. "Ryder," she said quietly, "what did you do?" "It's nothing," he said. "Ben's mistaken, that's all." "I'm not mistaken," Ben said, confused by the tension he'd caused. "I saw the horse clear as day, and it was definitely Thunder." "Ben, please," Sarah said, appearing from the kitchen and taking in the scene at a glance. "I need your help with something in the back." She hustled her husband out of the room, but the damage was done. Margaret turned to Ryder, her eyes bright with tears. "The medicine," she said. "That night when you went to get the medicine from the herbalist, you traded Thunder for it, didn't you?" Ryder wanted to lie, wanted to protect her from this, but he couldn't do it, not to her. "Yes," he said simply. "Oh God," Margaret whispered, pressing her hand to her mouth. "Ryder, no. Thunder was everything to you. He was worth a fortune. You've refused offers of $300 for that horse. I've heard people talk about it. And you just gave him up." "I gave him up for you," Ryder said. "And I'd do it again without hesitation. Margaret, Thunder was the finest horse I'll ever own, but he was still just a horse." "You're the woman I love. There was never any real choice." "But you loved that horse," Margaret said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know you did. You raised him from a foal, and you never told me. You've been walking 8 miles to town and 8 miles back every day for 3 weeks, and you never said a word about what it cost you to save my life." "Because I didn't want you to feel like you owed me anything," Ryder said. "I wanted you to get better because you wanted to get better, not because you felt guilty about Thunder. And I don't regret it, Margaret, not for 1 second. The moment I had to choose between my horse and your life, it wasn't even a question." Margaret stood up abruptly and walked to the window, her arms wrapped around herself. Ryder waited, giving her time to process this revelation. He could see her shoulders shaking and knew she was crying. "I don't know what to say," she finally said without turning around. "How do I thank you for something like that? How do I ever repay you?" "You don't," Ryder said, standing and crossing to her. "You don't owe me anything, Margaret. I made my choice freely and I'm at peace with it." She turned to face him, her cheeks wet with tears. "But I'm not at peace with it." "Ryder, You sacrificed something precious to you, and I can't bear the thought of you walking miles every day, of you being without your horse because of me." "Then marry me," Ryder said. The words came out before he'd planned them, but once they were spoken, he knew they were right. "I don't have the ring yet, it hasn't come in on the stage, but I don't care about that. Marry me, Margaret. Build a life with me. That's all the repayment I could ever want." "You're only asking because you think it will make me feel better about Thunder," Margaret said. "I'm asking because I love you," Ryder said firmly. "I'm asking because I've been planning to ask you since October. I'm asking because when I thought I was going to lose you, I realized that nothing else in this world matters to me as much as you do. Not horses, not the ranch, not anything." Margaret searched his face, looking for any hint of doubt or obligation. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you, Ryder Sullivan, but on one condition." "What condition?" "We find a way to get Thunder back." Ryder shook his head. "Marcus Chen won't sell. I already have one of the best horses in Nevada, and he knows it." "Then we offer him something he wants even more," Margaret said with sudden determination. "Everyone wants something, Ryder. We just have to figure out what that is." Over the next few days, Margaret threw herself into investigating Marcus Chen with the same intensity she brought to everything else. She asked questions around town, talked to the Chinese railroad workers who sometimes came to Elko for supplies, and pieced together a picture of the herbalist's life. What she learned was that Marcus Chen was a widower who had come to Nevada 15 years earlier to work on the railroad. He had learned herbalism from his father in China, and had built a reputation for healing when the railroad doctors couldn't or wouldn't treat Chinese workers. He had saved enough money to buy his canyon property, and now made his living selling remedies to anyone who could pay his prices. But the most interesting thing Margaret learned was that Marcus Chen had a daughter back in San Francisco, a young woman named Jade who had been raised by her aunt after her mother's death. Marcus had supported her financially, but had been unable to visit often because of the distance and his work. Jade had just graduated from a women's college and had written to her father about wanting to become a teacher, but she needed recommendations and connections that Marcus didn't have. "That's it," Margaret said excitedly when she told Ryder what she'd learned. "That's what we can offer him. I have connections back east, and I know people in the education field. I can write letters of recommendation for Jade, can help her find a position at a good school. That might be valuable enough for Marcus to consider a trade." "It's worth trying," Ryder said, though he didn't want to get his hopes up. They made the trip to Marcus Chen's cabin together 2 days after Christmas, Margaret bundled in a warm coat and scarf, riding behind Ryder on the rented mare he'd been using. The day was cold but clear, sunlight glittering off patches of snow in the shadowed places. Marcus Chen seemed surprised when he opened his door to find them both standing there. His eyes went to Margaret, assessing her health, and he nodded with satisfaction. "The medicine worked well, I see." "It saved my life," Margaret said. "Thank you for that. I understand now what it cost Ryder to obtain it, and I want to discuss the possibility of buying Thunder back." "The horse is not for sale," Marcus said firmly. "I made that clear when I traded for him." "I'm not offering money," Margaret said. "I'm offering something more valuable. May we come in and talk?" Marcus hesitated, then stepped aside. Once they were settled in his crowded front room, Margaret laid out her proposal. She spoke about Jade's aspirations, about the letters of recommendation she could provide from her father's contacts at various universities and schools, about her own experience in the educational field, and the advice she could offer. "I know this is unorthodox," Margaret said. "But your daughter wants to build a career and I can help her do that. In return, we would like Thunder back, not as a gift but as a fair trade, my help and connections for your horse." Marcus was silent for a long time, his face unreadable. Finally, he said, "Why does this matter so much to you?" "The horse is gone. You could simply move forward with your lives." "Because the man I love gave up something precious to save me," Margaret said simply. "And if there's any way I can restore that to him, I have to try. Not because I feel guilty, though I do, but because love means wanting the other person to be whole and happy." Marcus studied her face, then turned his gaze to Ryder. "You would have let me keep the horse. You never planned to ask for him back." "No," Ryder admitted. "A deal's a deal. And I got what I needed from it." "Interesting," Marcus said. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the winter landscape. "My daughter wrote to me last month. She said she felt lost, unsure of how to pursue her dreams in a world that does not always welcome Chinese women in positions of authority. I have money to give her, but not the connections or understanding of American society that she needs." He turned back to face them. "Your offer is generous, Miss Collins, more than generous. But I must ask, why would you do this for a stranger?" "Because you saved my life," Margaret said, "and because I believe in helping other women achieve their dreams. I came west because I needed a fresh start, and people here gave me that chance. I'd like to pay that forward." Marcus nodded slowly. "I will accept your offer, but with one addition. I would like you to meet with Jade when she comes to visit in the spring. I would like her to have a friend, someone who understands the world she wishes to enter. If you will offer her friendship as well as professional help, then Thunder is yours again." "I would be honored," Margaret said, standing to shake his hand. They retrieved Thunder from the small barn behind Marcus's cabin. The stallion whinnied when he saw Ryder, trotting over to nuzzle his former owner's shoulder. Ryder ran his hands over Thunder's coat, checking him for any injuries or signs of mistreatment, but the horse was in perfect condition. "I told you I would treat him with honor," Marcus said. "He is a fine animal. I will miss him." "Thank you for taking good care of him," Ryder said sincerely, "and thank you for agreeing to this trade." As they rode back toward Elko, Ryder on Thunder and Margaret on the rented mare, Margaret said, "I meant what I told Marcus about helping Jade. Even if he hadn't agreed to trade Thunder back, I would have wanted to do it anyway." "I know," Ryder said. "That's one of the things I love about you. You see someone in need, and you can't help but try to make things better." "Says the man who traded his most valuable possession to save someone's life," Margaret replied with a smile. Ryder reached over and took her hand. "Best trade I ever made." They were married on the first Sunday in February at the little church in Elko, with most of the town in attendance. Margaret wore a simple dress of ivory silk that she'd sewn herself, and Ryder wore his best suit with a new string tie. The ring from San Francisco had finally arrived, a delicate band with 3 small diamonds that caught the winter sunlight streaming through the church windows. Reverend Patterson performed the ceremony, his voice warm and certain as he spoke about love and commitment and the bonds that tie 2 souls together. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Ryder kissed Margaret with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance wiped away tears. The reception was held at the boarding house, with Sarah Morrison organizing everything down to the last detail. There was roast beef and potatoes, fresh bread and butter, and a cake that had taken Sarah 2 days to bake and decorate. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing in the parlor with the furniture pushed back against the walls. Ryder danced with his new wife, holding her close, marveling that she was really his. Margaret laughed up at him, her eyes sparkling with joy, looking nothing like the fevered, dying woman of 2 months before. "Happy?" he asked. "Incredibly," she said. "Though I admit I'm nervous about living on the ranch." I've always been a city girl, and I don't know the first thing about ranch life." "You'll learn," Ryder assured her. "And my parents are going to love you. My mother's been after me to get married for years." That night, they stayed in the best room at Elko's only hotel, a small but clean space with white curtains and a view of the moonlit mountains. Margaret was shy at first, nervous about the intimacy marriage brought, but Ryder was patient and gentle, and soon her nervousness melted into passion. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Margaret's head on Ryder's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Tell me about the night you went to get the medicine," Margaret said softly. "Tell me what you were thinking when Marcus Chen asked for thunder." Ryder was quiet for a moment, remembering that terrible moment of decision. "I thought about all the years Thunder and I had been together, about how much he meant to me. But then I thought about you, about losing you, about a world where you didn't exist anymore. And I realized that there was nothing I wouldn't give up to prevent that. Thunder was precious, but you're irreplaceable." Margaret tilted her head up to kiss him. "I hope you know that I would have done the same for you. If our positions had been reversed, if it had been you dying and I had something precious to trade, I wouldn't have hesitated either." "I know," Ryder said, pulling her closer. "That's how I know we're going to make this work, because we understand what love really means. It's not just the happy times and the easy choices. It's being willing to sacrifice for each other when it matters most." They moved to the Double S Ranch the next day, loading Margaret's few possessions into a wagon for the journey to Ryder's family home. The ranch was located in a broad valley 25 miles south of Elko, where grass grew thick in the summer, and the Humboldt River ran clear and cold. Ryder's father, Robert Sullivan, was a barrel-chested man in his 50s with a weathered face and kind eyes. His mother, Elena, was a former schoolteacher from California who had fallen in love with Robert when he was a young cowboy working a cattle drive through Sacramento. They welcomed Margaret with genuine warmth, Elena hugging her like a daughter and Robert shaking her hand with a grip that was firm but not crushing. "We're glad to have you here," Elena said. "This house has needed a woman's touch ever since I gave up trying to make cowboys appreciate clean floors." The ranch house was a sprawling structure built of logs and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides and a view of the valley that took Margaret's breath away. Inside, it was comfortable but clearly the domain of men who spent most of their time outdoors. Margaret could see where Elena had tried to impose order, with curtains at the windows and a good tablecloth in the dining room, but there was dust on the high shelves and mud tracked across the floor. "I can see I'll have my work cut out for me," Margaret said with a smile. Ryder showed her to the room that would be theirs, a large space on the 2nd floor with windows looking out over the valley. "We can fix it up however you like," he said. "Paint, new curtains, whatever you want." Margaret looked around the sparse room with its plain wooden furniture and decided she could make it home. "It's perfect," she said, "or it will be once we put our mark on it." The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Margaret had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and the constant work, the way everything revolved around the needs of the cattle and horses. Ryder had to learn to share his space, to consider another person's needs and wants, to remember that he had a wife waiting for him when he spent long days out on the range. But they were both willing to learn, both committed to making their marriage work. Margaret threw herself into ranch life with the same determination she brought to everything else. She learned to cook hearty meals for the ranch hands, to preserve food for the long winter, to manage the household accounts. She taught the ranch hands' children to read and write in the evenings, setting up an impromptu school in the ranch house parlor. Ryder learned to come home for supper when he could, to talk to Margaret about his day and listen to hers, to appreciate the small touches she brought to his life, like wildflowers in a jar on the table, or the smell of fresh bread when he came through the door. Spring came to the valley in a rush of green grass and wildflowers, and Ryder kept his promise to show Margaret the ranch in bloom. They rode out together on Thunder, Margaret seated in front of Ryder with his arms around her, traversing the valley floor where lupines and paintbrush turned the ground into a carpet of purple and orange. "It's like a painting," Margaret breathed. "I never imagined anything could be this beautiful." "I hoped you'd like it," Ryder said. "This is one of my favorite places in the world." They stopped by a small creek where aspen trees grew thick along the banks. Ryder helped Margaret down from the saddle, and they sat on the creek bank with their feet in the cold water, eating the lunch Margaret had packed. "I have something to tell you," Margaret said as they ate. "I wasn't sure when the right time would be, but this seems perfect." "What is it?" Ryder asked, hearing something serious in her tone. "I'm pregnant," Margaret said, watching his face carefully. "The baby should come in October if my calculations are right." Ryder felt a wave of emotion so powerful it left him speechless for a moment. "A baby," he finally managed. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Margaret asked. "I know we haven't been married long and maybe it's too soon, but I'm thrilled about it." "Too soon?" Ryder laughed and pulled her into his arms. "Margaret, I'm beyond happy. I'm ecstatic. We're going to be parents." They held each other by the creek while Thunder grazed nearby, talking about names and making plans for the future. Ryder found himself thinking about the night he'd traded Thunder for the medicine that saved Margaret's life, and he knew with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice. Because of that choice, he had Margaret, and now they would have a child together, a family, a future. In late April, Marcus Chen's daughter Jade arrived in Elko as promised. She was a lovely young woman of 20 with her father's intelligent eyes and her late mother's delicate features. Margaret invited her to stay at the ranch for a week, and the two women formed a quick friendship. Margaret spent hours with Jade, writing letters of introduction to schools and teaching positions, advising her on how to present herself to potential employers, sharing her own experiences as a woman in education. She also introduced Jade to some of the ranch hands' children she had been teaching, letting Jade see firsthand the satisfaction of helping young minds grow. "You have a gift for this," Jade said one evening as they sat on the ranch house porch watching the sunset. "Those children adore you." "I love teaching," Margaret admitted. "Even though I'm happy being a ranch wife, I miss it sometimes. The feeling of making a real difference in someone's life." "Maybe you could start a proper school here," Jade suggested. "There must be other children in the valley who need education." The idea took root in Margaret's mind. Over the following months, she began reaching out to the scattered families in the valley, offering to teach their children. By summer, she had 10 students meeting in the ranch house parlor 3 times a week. By fall, Ryder Sullivan had built a one-room schoolhouse on the ranch property, and Margaret's school had expanded to include 15 children of various ages. Jade found a teaching position at a women's school in Sacramento, thanks in large part to Margaret's letters and recommendations. She wrote regularly to thank Margaret for her help, and the two women maintained their friendship through correspondence. October arrived with cool nights and golden days, and Margaret went into labor on a crisp morning when frost sparkled on the grass. Alina Sullivan took charge, having helped birth many calves and foals over the years, and sent Ryder to fetch the midwife from a neighboring ranch. The labor was long and difficult, and Ryder spent the day pacing outside the bedroom door, jumping at every sound, terrified that something would go wrong. He kept thinking about how close he'd come to losing Margaret the winter before, and he prayed harder than he'd ever prayed that both she and the baby would be safe. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard the thin wail of a newborn. The midwife opened the door, smiling broadly. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy, and your wife did wonderfully." Ryder rushed into the room to find Margaret propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing with joy, holding a red-faced, squalling infant wrapped in a soft blanket. Alina stood nearby, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "Meet your son," Margaret said softly as Ryder approached. Ryder looked down at the tiny face, at the miniature fingers clenched into fists, and felt his heart expand in a way he hadn't known was possible. "He's perfect," he whispered. "You're perfect." They named him Robert after Ryder's father, but called him Robbie from the start. He had Margaret's gray-green eyes and Ryder's dark hair, and from his first day he had both parents wrapped around his tiny finger. The years that followed were full and happy. The ranch prospered under Robert Sullivan's management with Ryder's help, the cattle herds growing, and the range expanding. Margaret's school became a fixture in the valley, educating children who might otherwise have grown up illiterate. She hired a young woman from Elko to help her when the student numbers grew too large for one teacher to handle. Robbie grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who loved following his father around the ranch, mimicking Ryder's swagger and insisting on wearing a miniature hat just like the Cowboys. Thunder, now getting on in years but still strong, seemed to understand that the child needed protection and would stand perfectly still while Robbie climbed on his back. When Robbie was 3, Margaret gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Grace, who had their mother's wheat-colored hair and their father's easy smile. The ranch house became noisier and more chaotic, filled with the sounds of children laughing and playing, with the constant motion of family life. Ryder had never been happier. He would come in from a long day of work to find Margaret in the kitchen with flour on her cheek and a baby on her hip, and his heart would swell with love for this woman who had transformed his life. She would smile at him, and he would remember that terrible night when he'd thought he would lose her, and he would be grateful all over again for the choice he'd made. On their 5th anniversary, Ryder and Margaret took a rare evening alone, leaving the children with Alina and Robert, and riding out to the creek where they'd sat that spring day when Margaret told him she was pregnant with Robbie. The aspens had turned gold, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze. They sat in the same spot, older now but still deeply in love, watching the water flow past. "You remember what you told me once?" Margaret asked, leaning against Ryder's shoulder. "About how thunder was precious but I was irreplaceable." "Of course," Ryder said. "I think about that sometimes," Margaret continued. "About what it means to be loved that completely, to be valued above everything else. You gave me a gift that night, Ryder, and it wasn't just the medicine that saved my life. It was knowing that I mattered that much to someone." "You matter more than anything," Ryder said, kissing the top of her head. "You and our children, you're everything to me." "I know," Margaret said. "And I want you to know that I feel the same way about you. If the situation were ever reversed, if you needed me to give up everything I have to save you, I wouldn't hesitate, because that's what love is. Not the grand gestures or the romantic words, but the willingness to sacrifice when it really counts." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Thunder grazed nearby, content and peaceful, the horse who had been traded away and then returned, a living symbol of the sacrifice and love that had brought Ryder and Margaret together. The years continued to pass. Robbie grew into a capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, learning to ride and rope with natural skill. The twins became inseparable, 2 halves of a whole, both inheriting their mother's intelligence and their father's determination. When they were 6, Margaret gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas after Margaret's father. The school Margaret had started expanded into a proper building in Elko, funded by contributions from families throughout the county. Margaret served on the school board and continued to teach when she could, though managing 4 children and the ranch household took up most of her time. Marcus Chen became a regular visitor to the ranch, bringing herbs and medicines when anyone was ill, staying for dinners where he would tell stories about old China that had the children wide-eyed with wonder. He had moved to San Francisco to be near Jade, who had married a fellow teacher and given him grandchildren. But he returned to Nevada twice a year and always made time to visit the Sullivan Ranch. "I made a good trade that night," Marcus said one evening, watching Ryder and Margaret dance at a barn social. "I got a fine horse, and you got your life together. Sometimes the best bargains are the ones where everyone wins." "I think you might be right," Elena Sullivan agreed, standing beside him. "Though I suspect Ryder would say he got the better end of the deal." Thunder lived to the remarkable age of 28, finally passing away peacefully in his sleep in the barn on a warm summer night. Ryder mourned him deeply, but found comfort in the fact that the old stallion had lived a good, long life and had been surrounded by love until the end. They buried him on a hill overlooking the valley with a simple marker that read, "Thunder, faithful friend and partner." The trade that changed everything. Robbie was 15 when Thunder died, old enough to understand what the horse had meant to his father, old enough to know the story of how Ryder had traded Thunder to save Margaret's life. "You must have really loved Mom," he said to Ryder as they stood by Thunder's grave. "I did," Ryder said. "I do more than anything in this world." "Would you do it again?" Robbie asked. "If you had to choose, knowing everything that happened after?" Ryder looked out over the valley at the ranch that had grown and prospered, at the house where his wife and children waited. "In a heartbeat," he said. "Every time, without question. Some choices are easy, son, even when they hurt. When you really love someone, you'll understand that." As the years rolled into decades, Ryder and Margaret grew old together with grace. Their children married and had children of their own. Robbie took over management of the ranch when Robert Sullivan finally retired. The twins both became teachers like their mother, spreading education throughout Nevada. Thomas became a veterinarian, dedicating his life to caring for the animals that had been so much a part of his childhood. Margaret's school in Elko was renamed in her honor when she turned 60, becoming the Collins Academy for Young Scholars. She continued to teach occasional classes there until she was well into her 70s, refusing to let age slow her down, still committed to making a difference in young lives. Ryder remained active on the ranch until his own 70s, finally agreeing to let his son and grandsons handle the heavy work. But he still rode out every day, now on a gentle mare who reminded him a little of Thunder, checking on the cattle and the land, making sure everything was running smoothly. They celebrated their 50th anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, the ranch house bursting at the seams with family. Someone had dug out an old photograph from their wedding day, and everyone marveled at how young they looked, at how much life they'd lived together since that February day in 1879. "Tell us the story again," one of the great-grandchildren begged, "about how Grandpa saved Grandma's life." So Ryder told it, with Margaret adding details he forgot. The story of the terrible fever and the desperate ride to Marcus Chen's cabin, and the choice between a beloved horse and an even more beloved woman. The children listened with rapt attention, as did the adults who had heard it many times before but never tired of it. "The point of the story," Margaret said when Ryder finished, "is not that Grandpa gave up something valuable. The point is that love means being willing to sacrifice for each other. It means putting someone else's needs above your own wants. It means making hard choices and standing by them. And it means never regretting those choices," Ryder added, taking Margaret's hand, "because true love is worth any price." They lived into their 80s, both of them, defying the odds for people born in the 1850s and living through the rough years of the Old West. They saw Nevada become a state firmly established in the Union, saw the wild frontier transformed into settled communities, saw the cowboy way of life begin to fade as the 20th century progressed. But through all the changes, through all the years, they remained each other's constant. They still held hands when they walked. They still kissed goodnight before bed. They still looked at each other with love that had only deepened with time. Ryder died first, passing away quietly in his sleep on a spring morning much like the one when he'd first decided to ride to Elko to see Margaret all those years ago. He was 84 years old. Margaret held his hand as he took his last breath, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks, grateful for every moment they'd had together. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for trading thunder. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for 59 years of love." She lived for 2 more years, surrounded by family, still teaching occasionally, still active and engaged with life. But everyone could see that part of her had died with Ryder, that she was merely waiting for the day when she could join him again. That day came on a cool autumn afternoon when the aspens were gold and the sky was impossibly blue. Margaret was sitting on the porch of the ranch house, wrapped in a quilt, watching her great-great-grandchildren play in the yard. She closed her eyes, smiled, and simply didn't open them again. She was 86 years old. They buried her next to Ryder on the hill where thunder rested, 3 graves overlooking the valley they had all loved. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives Margaret and Ryder had touched. Former students, ranch hands, friends, and family spanning 4 generations. Robbie, now an old man himself, stood before the assembled crowd and spoke about his parents. "My father once told me that some choices are easy even when they hurt," he said. "He made one of those choices when he traded his best horse for the medicine that saved my mother's life. He never regretted it, never looked back, never asked for thanks or recognition. He just loved her, purely and completely for the rest of his life. And she loved him the same way. They showed all of us what real love looks like. Not perfect, not without struggles, but absolutely committed, absolutely true." The Sullivan family continued to thrive on the Double S Ranch, generation after generation, each one hearing the story of Ryder and Thunder and Margaret. The story became a family legend, told and retold, a reminder of what really mattered in life. The schoolhouse Margaret built still stood a century later, though it had been expanded and modernized. The barn where Thunder spent his final years was maintained as a historical landmark. And on the hill overlooking the valley, 3 graves remained carefully tended, their markers still legible. Ryder Sullivan, 1854–1938, loving husband, father, and cowboy. Margaret Collins Sullivan, 1857–1943, beloved wife, mother, and teacher. And between them, the smaller marker for Thunder. Every spring, when the wildflowers bloomed across the valley, someone from the Sullivan family would ride up to that hill and leave fresh flowers on all 3 graves. Because they understood what their ancestors had known. That love is worth any sacrifice, that some choices define our lives, and that the bonds forged in hardship and sealed with sacrifice are the ones that last forever. The story of the cowboy who traded his best horse for the medicine that saved the woman he loved became more than just a family tale. It became a legend in Nevada, a story told in schools and written about in books, a reminder of a time when the West was wild and life was hard, but love could still triumph over everything. And in the end, that was the real legacy Ryder and Margaret left behind. Not just the ranch or the school or the family they built, but the example of what true love really meant. The willingness to give up what you treasure most for someone you treasure more. The courage to make hard choices and stand by them. The understanding that some things are worth any price, and love is always, always, always one of them. The Wild West had been a place of harsh realities and difficult choices, where survival often depended on being tough and sometimes ruthless. But it was also a place where people learned what really mattered, where they discovered the depths of their own capacity for love and sacrifice. Ryder Sullivan and Margaret Collins Sullivan embodied that contradiction, living rough lives in a hard land, but never losing sight of the gentleness and grace that made life worth living. Their story was not one of grand adventures or dramatic shootouts or dangerous outlaw chases. It was simpler than that and more profound. A story of a man who loved a woman enough to give up his most precious possession to save her life, and of a woman who spent the rest of her life proving he had made the right choice. It was a story of commitment and sacrifice, of love tested by hardship and emerging stronger on the other side. In the end, that was what the Wild West had really been about for people like Ryder and Margaret. Not taming the land or conquering the frontier, but building lives of meaning and purpose, creating families and communities that would outlast the difficult years and blossom into something beautiful. They had taken the raw materials of the frontier, the dust and the hardship and the endless struggle, and had transformed them into something precious. A love story for the ages, a family legacy that would endure, and a reminder that the best things in life are worth whatever they cost. And if you had asked either of them, in those final years when they sat together on the porch watching the sun set over the valley they loved, if they had any regrets about the path their lives had taken, they would have answered without hesitation, none at all. Every choice, every sacrifice, every moment of joy and hardship had led them to where they were, together and in love after more than half a century, surrounded by the family and legacy they had built. That was worth more than any horse, more than any possession, more than anything else the world could offer. The trade Ryder made that cold December night in 1878 had been the best bargain of his life, even if he never told Margaret what it cost, until she figured it out for herself. And though Thunder was gone, though the Wild West was gone, though Ryder and Margaret themselves eventually passed into memory, their story remained, a testament to love, to sacrifice, and to the choices that define who we are and what we leave behind.